233 years. Barings Bank survived the Napoleonic Wars. It helped finance the Louisiana Purchase. For generations, it stood at the center of British power and global money. And in February 1995, it was destroyed in less than a week by a 28-year-old trader in Singapore. Or at least that is the simple version. His name was Leeson. He did not break into the vault. He did not hack the system. He was handed the keys, praised for using them, and almost nobody asked what he was doing behind the door. This is not just a story about one rogue trader. It is a story about what happens when an institution would rather believe a beautiful lie than ask an expensive question. Barings was not just old, it was prestigious in a way modern banks almost never are. In the City of London, Barings was old money with a myth around it. It was widely known as banker to the Queen. If you worked for Barings, people assumed you belonged in serious rooms. So when a young clerk from Watford named Leeson started producing profits in Singapore, that reputation became its own blindfold. He had no Oxford degree, no aristocratic surname, no family network in the city, just ambition, nerve, and an unusual advantage. He understood both the trades and the paperwork that could bury them. By the early 1990s, Barings sent Leeson to Singapore to run what was supposed to be a low-risk business. The idea sounded safe. Barings would exploit tiny price differences between futures markets in Singapore and Osaka. Fast trades, small margins, controlled risk. But Leeson was not just executing the trades. He also had power over how those trades were recorded and settled, the front office and the back office, the bets and the scoreboard. In any healthy bank, those jobs are separated for a reason. The trader takes risk. Someone else checks the risk, matches the paperwork, and makes sure the numbers are real. If one person controls both sides, they do not just place bets. They decide which bets become visible. Barings knew this. This was not advanced theory. It was one of the most basic rules in finance. And Barings let it slide. That is the real twist in this story. Barings was not killed by exotic math. It was killed by a centuries-old bank, allowing one man to act like both gambler and referee. Inside the Singapore office, Leeson had a place to hide what should have ended his career. Account 88888. Officially, it was an error account, the kind of place where small mismatches could sit temporarily until someone fixed them. In reality, it became a black hole. When a trade lost money, Leeson pushed the loss into 88888. When the market moved against him, he buried the damage. Then, he bet bigger, hoping the next win would erase the last disaster. The losses grew. 10 million. Then more. And London kept seeing what it wanted to see. Reported profits, strong headlines, a rising star in Asia. By 1993, Leeson was being credited with about £10 million in profit, roughly a tenth of Barings' reported profit for that year. Inside the bank, he did not look dangerous. He looked essential. That is how false confidence spreads inside institutions. Once a person starts producing extraordinary numbers, every control around them begins to feel inconvenient. Questions sound negative. Skepticism sounds old-fashioned. And profits start to silence people before the facts do. Even when warnings appeared, Barings failed to act. An internal audit flagged the lack of proper separation between trading and settlement in Singapore. The warning existed. The structure stayed in place, because stopping Leeson meant interrupting the money. This is the part most retellings rush past. The lie was not just created by one man, it was protected by incentives. Leeson needed the bank to keep trusting him. The bank needed the profits to keep looking real. That is how financial disasters grow in the dark. Not because nobody could know, because too many people preferred not to know. Then came January 17, 1995, the Kobe earthquake. It killed thousands and sent a shock through Japan. And for Leeson, sitting on enormous hidden positions tied to the Japanese market, it turned a concealed problem into a fatal one. The Nikkei fell, volatility surged, the losses inside 88888 exploded. A rational trader would have cut the position. A rational institution would have forced the issue into daylight. Leeson did neither. He doubled down, again and again. By that point, he was no longer trading. He was trying to resurrect a lie. The next position was supposed to save the previous one. The next rebound was supposed to make the hole disappear. The next miracle was supposed to protect his reputation, his career, and the bank that had built part of its story around his success. That is what makes the last stage of these stories so frightening. From the outside, it looks like confidence. From the inside, it is desperation wearing the mask of genius. By February, the hidden losses had reached £827 million. More than Barings could absorb, more than its capital base. This was not a temporary liquidity scare, it was insolvency. On February 23rd, Leeson left a note on his desk. "I'm sorry." Then he fled Singapore with his wife. 2 days later, Barings collapsed. 233 years of prestige, history, and reputation were finished. Not because the world had stopped trusting banks, because the bank had stopped measuring reality. The institution that once embodied solidity was exposed as something far weaker, a shell built around numbers nobody had tested hard enough. It was eventually sold to ING for £1. £1. That is what remained of Barings once the story and the balance sheet finally collided. Leeson was arrested in Frankfurt days later. He served prison time in Singapore. He wrote a memoir. He became the face of the disaster. And that is exactly where the story becomes too comfortable if you are not careful. Because once you turn Barings into the story of one bad man, the institution gets to pretend it was merely unlucky. It was not unlucky. It was permissive. Leeson did not defeat Barings' controls. He operated inside controls that were weak, blurred, and repeatedly tolerated. He told lies, yes. But they were lies the system made easy to tell. Several senior executives were later disciplined or banned. Some still found ways back into finance. The wider culture moved on, because finance has a talent for treating catastrophe like weather. A storm passes, the desks refill, the bonuses return, and everyone insists the next version will be different. That is why Barings matters now. Not because it is a museum piece from the 1990s, because it reveals a pattern that never really dies. Give one operator too much trust. Confuse complexity with control. Let profits excuse weak oversight. Delay the hard question because the answer might be expensive. And sooner or later, the hidden risk becomes the whole story. Barings was not the end of that pattern. It was an early trailer. 3 years later, long-term capital management would show the same illusion in a more sophisticated form. Not the same trade, the same illusion. A belief that smart people, elegant models, and borrowed money could tame risk so completely that warning signs no longer mattered. When LTCM began to fail, the numbers were bigger, the names were grander, and the threat reached far beyond one bank. Barings lost hundreds of millions. LTCM lost billions. The scale changed. The psychology did not. Every generation of finance creates a new genius who cannot lose, and every generation builds an institution willing to believe it, until reality asks for the books.